Chapter 22 Sign of the Bident. Scythe's days were filled with training in gleaning. Each day, Scythe would go out with Scythe to towns that were selected completely at random. She would watch as the Scythe prowled the streets and malls and parks, becoming like a lioness in search of vulnerable prey. Scythe learned to see the signs of the stagnant, as Scythe called them, although Scythe was not as convinced as she about their readiness to be gleaned. Scythe wondered how many of her own days had been filled with world weariness before becoming an apprentice to death. If Scythe had come across Scythe on one of those days, would the woman have gleaned her? They passed an elementary school one day as it was letting out, and Scythe had a sinking feeling that she would glean one of the students. "I never glean children," Scythe told her. "I've never found a child who seemed stagnant, but even if I did, I wouldn't do it. I've been admonished in conclave about it, but they've never taken disciplinary action against me." Scythe Faraday had no such rule. He had been strictly about statistics from the age of mortality. Fewer pre-adolescents died in those days, but they did die on occasion. In their time together, Scythe had known him to only do one such cleaning. He did not invite Rowan or her, and at dinner that night he broke into uncontrollable sobbing and had to excuse himself. If Scythe was ordained, she vowed to follow a policy like Scythe even if it got her in trouble with the selection committee. Almost every night, she and the Scythe would prepare dinner for mourning family members. Most would live with their spirits lifted, some would remain inconsolable, resentful, hateful, but they were in the minority. Such was life and death for Scythe in the days before the harvest conclave. She couldn't help but think of Rowan and wonder how he was faring. She longed to see him, but she dreaded it at the same time, because she knew in a few short months she'd be seeing him for the last time, one way or another. And she held on to the narrow hope that if she could prove Scythe Faraday was taken out by a fellow Scythe, perhaps that could be a monkey wrench hurled into the relentless gearworks of the Scythedom. A monkey wrench that would free Scythe from having to glean or be gleaned by Rowan. Most of the bereaved that Scythe had to notify were the same: husbands, wives, children, parents. At first, she had resented that Scythe made her the front line for these heartbroken people, but soon she came to understand why. It wasn't so that Scythe could avoid it, but so that Scythe could experience it and learn how to show compassion in the face of tragedy. It was emotionally exhausting, but rewarding. It was preparing her to be a Scythe. Only one time did her post-gleaning experience differ. The first part of her job was tracking down the immediate family of the gleaned. There was one woman who seemed to have no immediate family, just one strange brother. It was odd in this time when extended families were more often than not a convoluted web that spanned 6 living generations or more, yet this poor woman had only a brother. Scythe mapped out the others, went there, but wasn't paying all that much attention. She didn't know where she was until she was right in front of the place. It wasn't a home, not in the traditional sense. It was a monastery, a walled dove compound styled after the historical missions. But unlike those ancient structures, the symbol at the apex of the central steeple was not a cross, but a two-pronged turning fork. The bident. It was a sign of the tone cults. This was a Thonist monastery. Scythe shivered in the way anyone shivers at the prospect of something vaguely alien and darkly mystic. "Stay away from those lunatics," her father once told her. "People get sucked in and are never seen again," which was a ridiculous thing to say. No one truly disappears in this day and age. The Thunderhead knows exactly where everyone is at all times. Of course, it doesn't have to tell. Under other circumstances, Scythe might have heeded her father's advice, but she was making a bereavement call, and that trumped any trepidation. She entered the compound through a gated arch. The gate wasn't locked. She found herself in a garden full of white, rich-smelling flowers, gardenias. Tone coats were all about aroma and sounds. They gave little value to the sense of sight. In fact, the more extreme Tony's groups actually blinded themselves, and the Thunderhead reluctantly allowed it, preventing their healing Mananites from restoring sight. It was awful, and yet was one of the few expressions of religious freedom left in a world that had laid its various gods to rest. Scythe followed a stone path through the garden to the church on which stood the sign of the fork, and she pushed her way through the heavy oak doors into a chapel lined with books. It was dim, even though there were stained glass windows on either side. They were not from the mortal age, but were tonest in nature. They depicted various strange scenes: a shirtless man carrying a huge turning fork on his burdened back, a stone fracturing and shooting forth bolts of lightnings, crowds running from a nasty vermiform creature in the form of a double helix that spiraled out of the ground. She didn't like the images, and didn't know what these people believed, only that it was laughable, ludicrous. Everyone knew that this so-called religion was just a hodgepodge of mortal age faiths slapped together into a troubling mosaic. Yet, somehow, there were people who found that strange ideological mosaic to be enticing. A priest, or monk, or whatever you call a cult clergyman, was at the altar, chanting in monotone and dousing lit candles one by one. "Excuse me," Scythe said. Her voice was much louder than she meant it to be, a trick of the chapel's acoustics. The man wasn't startled by her. He put out one more candle, then set down his silver snuffer and hobbled toward her with a pronounced limp. She wondered if it was affected, or if his religious freedom allowed him to retain whatever scoring caused the limp. By the wrinkles on his face, she could tell that he was long overdue to turn a corner. "I am Curate Beauregard," he said. "Have you come for atonement?" "No," she told him, showing her armband that bore the seal of Scythes. "I need to speak to Robert Ferguson." "Brother Ferguson is in afternoon repose. I shouldn't disturb him." "It's important," she told him. The curate sighed. "Very well, that which comes can be avoided." Then he hobbled off, leaving Scythe alone. She looked around, taking in the strange surroundings. The altar in the front contained a granite basin filled with water, but the water was cloudy and foul-smelling. Just behind that was the focal point of the entire church, a steel two-pronged fork similar to the one on the roof outside. This bident was 6 feet tall and protruded from an obsidian base. Beside it, on its own little platform, sat a rubber mullet resting on a black velvet pillow. But it was the bident that held her attention. The huge tuning fork was cylindrical, silvery smooth, and cold to the touch. "You want to strike it, don't you? Go on, it's not forbidden." Scythe jumped and silently chided herself for being caught off guard. "I am Brother Ferguson," said the man as he approached. "You wanted to see me?" "I'm the apprentice of Venerable Scythe Marie Curie," Scythe told him. "I've heard of her. I'm here on bereavement mission." "Go on." "I'm afraid that your sister, Marisa Ferguson, was cleaned by Scythe Curie today at 1:15 p.m. I'm very sorry for your loss." The man didn't seem upset or shocked, merely resigned. "Is that all?" "Is that all? Did you hear me? I just told you that your sister was cleaned today." The man sighed. "That which comes can be avoided." If she didn't already dislike the Tonists, she certainly did now. "Is that it?" she asked. "Is that your people's holy line?" "It's not a line, it's just simple truth we live by." "Yeah, whatever you say. You'll need to make arrangements for your sister's body, because that's coming and can't be avoided either." "But if I don't step forward, won't the Thunderhead provide a funeral?" "Don't you care at all?" The man took a moment before answering. "Death by the scythe is not a natural death. We Tonists do not acknowledge it." Cydra cleared her throat. biting back the verbal reaming she wanted to give him, and did her best to remain professional. There's one more thing. Although you didn't live with her, you are her only documented relative. That entitles you to a year of immunity from gleaning. I don't want immunity, he said. Why am I not surprised? This was the first time she had ever encountered anyone who refused immunity. Even the most downhearted would kiss the ring. You've done your job. You may go now, Brother Ferguson said. There was only so long Scythe could restrain her frustration. She couldn't yell at the man. She couldn't use her vocator moves to kick him in the neck or take him down with an elbow slam. So she did the only thing she could do. She picked up the mallet and put all of her anger into a single, powerful strike at the tuning fork. The fork resounded so powerfully, she could feel it in her teeth and her bones. It rang not like a bell, which was a hollow sound. The stone was full and dense. It sucked the anger right out of her, diffused it. It made her muscles loosen, her jaw unclench. It echoed in her brain, her gut, and her spine. The tone rang much longer than such a thing should, then slowly began to fade. She had never experienced anything that was quite so jarring and soothing at the same time. All she could say was, "What was that?" F sharp, said Brother Ferguson. Although there's a standing argument among the brethren that it's actually A flat. The fork was still ringing faintly. Scythe could see it vibrating, making its edge look blurry. She touched it, and the moment she did it, fell silent. You have questions, said Brother Ferguson. I'll answer what I can. Scythe wanted to deny that she had any questions whatsoever, but suddenly she found that she did. What do you people believe? We believe many things. Tell me one. We believe that flames were not meant to burn forever. Scythe looked to the candles by the altar. Is that why the curate was using candles? Part of our ritual, yes. So you worship darkness? No, he said. That's a common misconception. People use that to vilify us, but what we worship are the wavelengths and vibrations that are beyond the limits of human sight. We believe in the great vibration and that it will free us from being stagnant. Stagnant. It was the word Scythe could use to describe the people she chose to glean. Brother Ferguson smiled. Indeed, something resonates in you now, doesn't it? She looked away, not wanting to meet his intrusive gaze, and found her eyes settling on the stone basin. She pointed to it. What's with the dirty water? That's primordial ooze. It's brimming with microbes. Back in the age of mortality, this single basin could have wiped out entire populations. It was called disease. I know what it was called. He dipped his finger in the slimy water and swirled it around. Smallpox, polio, Ebola, anthrax, they're all in there, but it's harmless to us now. We couldn't get sick if we wanted to. He raised his finger from the full latch and licked it off. I could drink down the whole bowl, and it wouldn't even give me indigestion. Alas, we can no longer turn water into warm. Scythe left without another word and without turning back, but for the rest of the day she couldn't get the stench of that foul-smelling water out of her nostrils. The business of the Thunderhead is no business of mine. The Thunderhead's purpose is to sustain humanity. Mine is to mold it. The Thunderhead is the root, and I am the shears, pruning the limbs into fine form, keeping the tree vital. We are both necessary, and we are mutually exclusive. I do not miss my so-called relationship with the Thunderhead, nor do the junior Scythes I've come to see as disciples. The absence of the Thunderhead's uninvited intrusions into our lives is a blessing, for it allows us to live without a safety net, without the crutch of a higher power. I am the highest power I know, and I like it that way. And as for my gleaning methods, which now and then have been brought under scrutiny, I say merely this. Is it not the job of the gardener to save the tree as much as possible? And sudden branches that begin to reach unreasonably high be the first to be pruned? From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe Goddard. Chapter 23. The Virtual Rabbit Hole. Just down the hall from Scythe's room was a study. Like every other room in the residence, it had windows on multiple sides, and like everything else in Scythe Curie's life, was kept in perfect order. There was a computer interface there, which Scythe used for his studies, because, unlike Faraday, Scythe Curie did not shun the digital when it came to learning. As a Scythe's apprentice, Scythe had access to databases and information that most people didn't. The backbrain, it was called, all the raw data within the Thunderhead's memory that was not organized for human consumption. Before her apprenticeship, when she did a standard search for things, the Thunderhead would invariably intrude, saying something like, "I see you are searching for a gift. May I ask for whom? Perhaps I can help you find something appropriate." Sometimes she would let the Thunderhead help her. Other times she enjoyed searching alone. But since becoming a Scythe's apprentice, the Thunderhead had gone disturbingly mute, as if it were nothing more than its data. "You'll have to get used to that," Scythe Faraday had told her early on. "Scythes cannot speak to the Thunderhead, and it will not speak to us. But in time, you'll come to appreciate the silence and self-reliance that comes from its absence." Now, more than ever, she could have used the Thunderhead's artificial intelligence guidance as she browsed through its data files, because the worldwide public camera system seemed designed to thwart her efforts. Her attempts to track Scythe Faraday's movements on the day he died was proving harder than she thought. Video records in the backbrain were not organized by camera, or even by location. It seemed the Thunderhead linked them by concept. A moment of identical traffic patterns in completely different parts of the world were linked. Footage featuring people with similar strides were linked. One strand of associations led to images of increasingly spectacular sunsets, all caught by street cams. The Thunderhead's digital memory, Scythe came to realize, was structured like a biological brain. Every moment of every video record was connected to 100 others by different criteria, which meant that every connection Scythe followed led her down a rabbit hole of virtual neurons. It was like trying to read someone's mind by dissecting their cerebral cortex. It was mothering. The Scythedom, she knew, had created its own algorithm for searching the unsearchable contents of the backbrain, but Scythe couldn't ask Scythe Curie without making her suspicious. The woman had already proven that she could see through any lie Scythe put forth, so best not to be in a position where Scythe would have to lie. The search began as a project, quickly evolved into a challenge, and now was an obsession. Scythe would secretly spend an hour or two each day trying to find footage of Scythe Faraday's final movements, but to no avail. She wondered if, even in its silence, the Thunderhead was watching what she did. Oh my, you've been peeking through my brain," it would say if it were allowed, with a virtual wink. "Naughty, naughty." Then, after many weeks, Scythe had an epiphany. If everything uploaded to the Thunderhead was stored in the backbrain, then not just public records were there, but personal as well. She couldn't access other people's private records, but anything she uploaded would be available to her, which meant she could see the search with that of her own. "There is no actual law that says I can visit my family while I am an apprentice." Scythe brought it up in the middle of dinner one night, with neither warning nor context of conversation. It was her intent to blindside Scythe Curie with it. She could tell it worked because of the length of time it took Scythe Curie to respond. She took 2 whole spoonfuls of soup before saying a thing. "It's our standard practice, and a wise one, if you ask me. It's cruel. Didn't you already attend a family wedding?" Scythe wondered how Scythe Curie knew that, but wasn't about to let herself be derailed. "In a few months I might die. I think I should have a right to see my family a few times before then." Scythe Curie took 2 more spoonfuls of soup before saying, "I'll consider it." In the end, she agreed, as Scythe knew she would. After all, Scythe Curie was a fair woman, and Scythe had not lied. She did want to see her family, so the Scythe could not read deceit in Scythe's face because there was none. But Of course, seeing her family wasn't Scythe's only reason for going home. Everything on Scythe's street looked the same as she and Scythe Curie strode down it, yet everything was different. A faint sense of longing tugged at her, but she couldn't be sure what she longed for. All she knew was that walking down her street suddenly felt like she was walking in some foreign land where the people spoke a language she didn't know. They rode the elevator up to Scythe's apartment with a pudgy woman with a pudgier back who was positively terrified. The woman, not the dog. The dog couldn't care less. Mrs. Yeltner, that was her name. Before Citra left home, Mrs. Yeltner had reset her lipid point to svelte, but apparently the procedure was struggling against a gluttonous appetite because she was bulging in all the wrong places. Hello, Mrs. Yeltner, Citra said, guilty to be enjoying the woman's thinly veiled terror. Good, good to see you, she said, clearly not remembering Citra's name. Wasn't there just a clinic on your floor earlier this year? I didn't think it was allowed to hit the same building too soon. It's allowed, Citra said, but we're not here to clean today. Although, added Scythe Curie, anything's possible. When the elevator reached her floor, Mrs. Yeltner actually tripped over her dog in her hurry to get out. It was a Sunday. Both of Citra's parents and her brother were home, waiting. The visit wasn't a surprise, but there was surprise on her father's face when he opened the door. Hi, Dad, Citra said. He took her into his arms in a hug that felt warm, but yet obligatory as well. We've missed you, honey, said her mother, hugging her as well. Ben kept his distance and just stared at the Scythe. We were expecting Scythe Faraday, her father said to the lavender-clad woman. Long story, said Citra. I have a new mentor now. And Ben blurted out. You're Scythe Curie. Ben, chided their mother, don't be rude. But you are, aren't you? I've seen pictures. You're famous. The Scythe offered a modest grin. Infamous is more accurate. Mr. Terranova gestured to the living room. Please, come in. But Scythe Curie never crossed the threshold. I have business elsewhere, she said, but I'll return for Citra at dusk. She nodded to Citra's parents, winked at Ben, then turned to leave. The moment the door was closed, both her parents seemed to fall just a bit, as if they had been holding their breath. I can't believe you're being taught by the Scythe, Curie, the grandma of death. Grandam, not grandma. I didn't even know she still existed, said Citra's mom. Don't all Scythe have to clean themselves eventually? We don't have to do anything, Citra said, a little surprised at how little her parents really knew about how the Scythedom worked. Scythes only self-clean if they want to, or if they're murdered, thought Citra. Her room was the way she had left it, just cleaner. And if you're not ordained, you can come home and it will be like you never left, her mother said. Citra didn't tell her that either way she would not be coming home. If she achieved Scythehood, she would probably live with other junior Scythes, and if she did not become an ordained Scythe, she would not live at all. Her parents didn't need to know that. It's your day, her father said. What would you like to do? Citra rummaged through her desk drawer until she found her camera. Let's go for a walk. The small talk was of the microscopic variety, and although it was good to be with her family, never had the barrier between them felt denser. There were so many things she wished she could talk about, but they'd never understand, never be able to relate. She couldn't talk to her mother about the intricacies of Killcraft. She couldn't commiserate with her father about that moment when life left a person's eyes. Her brother was the only one she felt remotely comfortable talking to. I had a dream that you came to my school and cleaned all the jerks, he told her. Really? Citra said. What color were my robes? He hesitated. Turquoise, I think. Then that will be the color I'll choose. Ben beamed. What will we call you once you're ordained? Her father said, treating it as if it were a certainty. Citra hadn't even considered the question. She never heard the Scythe referred to by anything but their patron historic or your honor. Were family members bound to that as well? She hadn't even chosen her patron yet. She dodged the question by saying, "You're in my family, you can call me whatever you like," hoping that was true. They strolled around town, although she didn't tell them. They passed the small home where she had lived with Rowan and Scythe Faraday. They passed the train station nearest the home, and everywhere they went, Saitra made a point to take a family picture, each from an angle very close to that of the nearest public camera. The day was emotionally exhausting. Saitra wanted to stay longer, and yet a big part of her couldn't wait for Scythe Curie to arrive. She resolved not to feel guilty about that. She'd had more than her share of guilt. Guilt is the idiot cousin of remorse, Scythe Faraday had been fond of saying. Scythe Curie didn't ask Saitra any questions about her visit on the way home, and Saitra was content not to, sir. She did ask the Scythe something, though. "Does anyone ever call you by your name? Other Scythes, ones I'm friendly with, will call me Marie, as in Marie Curie. My patron historic was a great woman. She coined the term radioactivity and was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize back when such things were awarded. But what about your real name, the one you were born with?" Scythe Curie took her time in answering. Finally, she said, "There's no one in my life who knows me by that name." "What about your family? They must be still around. After all, they have immunity from gleaning as long as you're alive." She sighed. "I haven't been in touch with my family for more than 100 years. Saitra wondered if that would happen to her. Do all Scythes lose the ties to everyone they had known? Everything they had been before they were chosen? "Susan," Scythe Curie finally said. "When I was a little girl, they called me Susan. Susie, Sue. It's a pleasure to meet you, Susan." Saitra found it next to impossible to imagine Scythe Curie as a little girl. When they got home, Saitra uploaded her pictures to the Thunderhead without worrying if the Scythe saw, because there was nothing unusual or suspicious about that. Everyone uploaded their photos. It would have been suspicious if she hadn't. Then, later that night, when Saitra was sure Scythe Curie was asleep, she went to the study, got online, and retrieved the pics, which was easy to do since they were tagged. Then she dove into the backbrain, following all the links the Thunderhead had forged to her images. She was led to other pictures of her family, as well as other families that resembled hers in some way. Expected, but there were also links to videos taken by street cams in the same locations. That's just what she was looking for. When she created her own algorithm to sort out the relevant photos from the street cams, she had a full complement of surveillance videos. Of course, she was still left with millions of randomly accessed unordered files, but at least now they were all street cam records of Scythe Faraday's neighborhood. She uploaded an image of Scythe Faraday to see if she could isolate videos in which he appeared, but as she suspected, nothing came back. The Thunderhead's hands-off policy when it came to Scythes meant that Scythe's images were not tagged in anyway. Still, she had successfully narrowed the field from billions of records to millions. However, tracking Scythe Faraday's movements on the day he died was like trying to find a needle in a field of haystacks that stretched to the horizon. Even so, she was determined to find what she was looking for, no matter how long it took. Gleanings should be iconic. They should be memorable. They should have the legendary power of the greatest battles of the mortal age, passed down by word of mouth, becoming as immortal as we are. That is, after all, why we Scythes are here. To keep us connected to our past, tethered to mortality. Yes, most of us will live forever, but some of us, thanks to the Scythedom, will not. For those who will be gleaned, do we not, at the very least, owe them a spectacular end? From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe Goddard.